welcome to the Political Subdivisions Interim Committee. Thank you for joining us. We're still short a senator to have a quorum, but we'll go ahead and get started and hope that one will join us. We'll hold off on the minutes till we have a quorum. The first item we'll hear is draft legislation on tax increment financing. So last year, Legislative Auditor's Audit did an audit on tax increment financing. They gave a report with some suggested recommendations. We worked on legislation during the session, felt it needed a little more time, and so that legislation is ready. We'll be considering that draft legislation today. First, we'll hear from Nicole from our Legislative Auditor's Office. She'll give you an overview of the audit, and then we'll walk you through the proposed legislation. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleasure to be with you today.
Pull that really close to you.
Really close.
Thank you.
All right. Pleasure to be with you today. I'm happy to be here. We walked through a presentation of the tax increment financing audit last month in the subcommittee meeting, but just as a reminder, there were 11 recommendations that were made regarding transparency and accountability to increase the transparency and accountability of these redevelopment project areas. 6 of those recommendations were made to the legislature for their consideration in amending statute to include some items, agenda items, and increasing the transparency and the accountability. For example, we found that many of these redevelopment agencies had large fund balances with roughly $17.5 million in fund balances. And so one of the recommendations addresses that there be a provision when a collection period expires that there's an amount of time that these funds have to be spent within the project area. So it's been a pleasure working with your committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and happy to speak to any of the other recommendations and how the legislation addresses those.
Thank you. And so just a reminder, she said we did a more thorough review of this last interim. So I'm going to ask Mr. Bob Reese to give us an overview of the legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Robert Reese from the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. You've been provided a draft of tax incentive revisions, a bill that Representative Dunnigan is sponsoring. This is intended to address the recommendations, or at least some of the recommendations made in the legislative audit. This does a few things. One is it includes a requirement that when an agency, a redevelopment agency, enters into a participation agreement with someone for the development in project area, that the resolution approving it has to include a finding describing how the project area development described in the agreement will contribute to achieving the goals, policies, and purposes of the project area plan. That's language found on line 397 through 399. It also has some language that kind of tries to match up the currently under the law, an agency is required to provide information that goes on GOEO's website. It's a kind of a report format. And this adds to that information that an agency is required to provide a kind of a matching up of receipts and expenditures by category, so that if you look at line 453, the existing language requires the information would include the project area budget, and the new language would include language that says that it has to show receipts and expenditures categories by the type of receipt and expenditure related to the development performed or to be performed under the project area plan. And then further on, it talks about line 475, the information also has to include a description of how the goals, policies, and purposes of the project area plan have been furthered during the preceding year. So it kind of gives some more specific information for the public to have access to, that kind of shows not only a broad-based information about the receipts and expenditures of the associated with the project area, but categorizes them by budget and kind of lines up what the budget is with the actual expenditures in those categories. The bill also contains language relating to kind of some incentives for providing the information and disincentives for not providing the information. So on lines, beginning line 494, if an agency hasn't complied with the reporting requirements, they're basically reported to the state auditor for review, and if they don't provide this information over an extended period of time, then they can be subject to having part of their tax increment actually kind of withheld until they comply. The bill also addresses one of the concerns, and that is the accumulated balances that exist. And this says that if an accumulated balance of tax increment hasn't been spent within 5 years after the tax increment period ends, that the agency then is required to devote that money to housing under current existing provisions related to housing provided by tax increment money from agencies. One other concept is that it requires in coming up with the proposal to use tax increment, the agency has to kind of go through an analysis as to whether the proposed new development would occur anyway without the use of tax increment. So it requires them to do an analysis. Would this project happen even if we didn't have tax increment? And that same requirement applies in the context of a tax credit incentive that under GOEO. That's kind of a broad overview of what the bill does to address the recommendations made by the audit. I'm happy to answer any specific questions.
Thank you, Bob. Let's go to the committee for questions. Representative Cutler.
Is that on?
Cutler.
Thanks. Thank you for that. That's helpful. I wonder if I could ask Mr. Chair, I wonder if I could
Go
ask
ahead.
Mr. Reese if the frequency of reporting is increased in any way in these requirements. Is it still the same frequency and we're just adding additional items to report, or are we also increasing the frequency?
I believe it's still an annual requirement, but it's just adding some more detail to what needs to be reported.
Thank you. And a follow-up, if I may, you mentioned the requirement, hey, if without the increment financing, would this occur anyway? Are there any standards as to how that is determined or analyzed, or is it left up to the analysis, whoever's doing the analysis, to make that argument?
Yeah, the language is pretty broad. It just requires them to do an analysis and evaluation of that. It doesn't specify what the criteria or standards are for that.
Let me just make a comment on that. So right now, that test or that doesn't have to be done at all. And so this is a step to say, look, at least do an analysis and say if it's really needed, if the private sector will step in, try to provide greater transparency. Representative Walters, is that your light that was on?
That is my light,
Okay, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chair. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Reese.
Go ahead.
So one of the things I heard you mention in the summary, and I can see this in the audit summary here, is the TIF fund balance that's growing, or unused funds. Are these funds do we know if these are funds that are from the original issue of the bonds, or if they're money that is essentially accumulating because of property tax revenue that is now essentially being paid to service the debt? Do we know which that is?
I don't know specifically. I don't know if Nicole has any more information on that specifically.
Nicole, would you like
It's
to
just-
comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tax increment financing funds, those are marginal increases on the property taxes that are paid over time. So as a project area can be anywhere from 5-10 years to 25 years, there's actually no expiration date on how long a project area can last. And so I think that's where we're trying to address, is that these collections, as annual increases are coming in as the property value increases with the development, those marginal increases from the property taxes are in a fund, and those can be used for different things like administrative costs or incentives, things like that. But those are accumulated over time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that brings up something that, again, as we look at this proposed legislation, there's two sources of cash, right? The first one is when you issue the bonds, then you get cash proceeds, and are those invested properly? And I think that's a reasonable thing for us to be evaluating and considering. I think the second one is it was an unexpected thing really over the last 5 years for property values in many cases to double. And when the property values doubled, in most of our property tax situations, the rate will fall. But in this tax increment financing, I don't think the rate adjusts. And so we're collecting in some cases double the amount of revenue that we were projecting when we originally did the tax increment financing. And if we don't have a way to address that, then what happens is the cash balances don't have any, there's no way to appropriately put those funds to use, and it'll grow our cash balances as long as we can't either adjust the rate or find a way to put those property tax revenues that are collected under the tax increment financing to use appropriately. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Walter. Is anybody down on that end? Representative Garner.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Another question for Mr. Reese on the legislation. Is there any requirement for agencies to publish this online, or for their analyses, or for the receipts and expenditures? Is that in this legislation, or is that in other ways in statute?
Well, they have to make their project area plan and budget public, and then this information that's required to be submitted to GOEO is published on the GOEO website.
Thank you.
I don't see any further questions. Let me go back to Nicole.
Yes.
Why don't, so you did an audit, you looked into this. Why don't you tell us your thoughts on the proposed legislation?
So we've had an opportunity to review the draft legislation as it relates to the audit recommendations. And we feel that the 6 recommendations addressed to the legislature to try and increase the transparency and accountability with these redevelopment project areas are being addressed in this draft legislation. And so we appreciate the opportunity to have input and be able to review these items as it relates to the audit, and feel that that's adequately addressed.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the public who would like to comment on this. I don't see any in person. Let's go online. Okay, so we have Danny Waltz. Go ahead, Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Can everyone hear me online?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you again. My name is Danny Waltz. I'm speaking on behalf of the Utah Redevelopment Association. First, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chair, as well as Senator Harper, for your work on drafting this bill, and also the work of Nicole and Ben performing the audit. I think on behalf of all the agencies that they met with, I'd like to say what a very professional and thorough job they did on this audit. And it was very fair, very transparent. We all had the opportunity to speak to it and provide information. I want to echo what Nicole said, is that on behalf of the association, we feel that this bill does a very good job of addressing the recommendations of the audit, adds better provisions for transparency and reporting, and also starts to install better guardrails for best practices that we as agencies appreciate the ability to follow and report on. As everyone knows, RDAs are very complicated. This legislation has been in effect for over 50 years. It's gone through significant changes over the past few decades. You're looking at a tool that is used in multiple cities, multiple project areas within those cities over different timeframes and parts of the statute. So it gets very complicated in looking at how we apply some of these standards. And I raise that issue just to state what a good job the audit did at really trying to break down the 6 recommendations that came from it. The only change that we would propose that has come about is our follow-up conversations and review of the information is the language regarding the 5-year timeframe is one that we all thoroughly support and think it's a good solution. We would ask for a clarification that 5 years also be applied to project areas that may have already expired and are sitting on those fund balances so that they have an opportunity to spend those down in accordance with the rest of the provisions of the proposed legislation. So that would be the only additional comment or request we would have within the language of the bill. And then if I may, Mr. Chair, I'd like to take a second to address the questions of the committee.
Go ahead.
Regarding the source of funds. I think it's important to note that number one, obviously the majority of the initial funds that agencies receive is the tax increment. We do not always issue bonds against these project areas. And so we're not always, the remaining funds are typically tax increment funds only and not usually bond funds. Most bond funds that we receive have a window directly tied to the bond itself that has a spend down period that we have to follow. So I wanted to provide clarification on that and then also address the question on the tax rate. Agencies essentially use the same tax rate that any other entities apply. So we do not have a separate tax rate that is used just for the collection of tax increments. So I think Representative Walter did a great job of explaining one of the factors of tax increment, that is property values increase, tax rates decrease, and we as agencies experience that same change as part of the certified tax rate. So wanted to just clarify that. Happy to answer any other questions. And again, Mr. Chair, I want to thank you and the rest of the committee.
Thank you, Danny. Let's go to Rusty Cannon from the taxpayers. Go ahead, Rusty.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes. We can hear you, Rusty. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. We are supportive of this legislation. This goes a good long way in accomplishing what we think needs to be accomplished. If there are opportunities to true up a little bit of some of these provisions, we'd probably be the first in line to offer some suggestions, but we're still working on seeing if they're viable. But at this point, we think this is a great bill, a good effort to, and would urge this moving forward from the Taxpayers Association perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have anyone else online? Anyone else from the public? Danny, we have a question for you regarding your 5-year new versus old projects. Can you restate that so we can understand what you're saying?
Yes, appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. With regard to any project areas that are currently expired, and by expired, I mean they are no longer in their collection of tax increment, but they may still have a active project area in terms of they're still doing projects, but they're no longer receiving any tax increment. Any of those project areas that are sitting on remaining funds, as the audit pointed out, providing them a 5-year window of opportunity to spend those funds from the day the legislation goes into effect. Since they've already hit that deadline that's currently described in the legislation, we want to make it clear that their window of 5 years starts now, and that even though they're expired, they still have time to spend that money down.
Okay.
I can speak on behalf of Salt Lake City that we have project areas that are still active. We no longer receive increment, but we're still working on some projects within that. So we want to make sure that those agencies have the ability, and we're not suddenly in violation of this legislation the day it's approved and we have remaining funds.
Okay, so the legislation just says project area. It doesn't really discriminate between old or new. You're wanting something that says from this date or something like that. Let me go to Mr.
Correct.
Reese.
It's in lines 516 through 518. It says you have 5 years from the last day you've collected increment. but it's not necessarily clear that that applies to already expired project areas.
Okay, Bob, do you understand that?
Yeah.
Can you fix it?
Yeah, we'd have to change the.
Apologize for raising that right now, Mr. Reese.
I'll work on it.
Okay, we're going to try to come up with a fix. And then, so committee will go on with our agenda and give Mr. Reese a chance to see if he can address Danny's comments. And we now have a quorum, but we'll come back to that in a bit. All right, now we have a quorum. Senator Stevenson, thank you for joining us. Let's consider the minutes of May 17th, 2023, discussion to the minutes. Is there somebody that would like to approve the minutes? Representative Kyle.
Motion that we approve the minutes from the May 2023.
Thank you. The motion is to approve the minutes of May 17th, 2023. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. The minutes are approved. Okay, next we'll go to item number 2, the San Juan County Commission Performance Audit. We'll consider the recommendations and finding of the performance audit of the San Juan County Commission and hear the response from the county. We have our legislative auditors, Mr. August Lehman. Go ahead. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks, Chair. Let's see if this thing's working first. Oh, yes, okay. In our audit of San Juan County Commission, we have 2 findings. The first is that we found that some actions by former San Juan County Commissioners are questionable. In the fall of 2022, one of the 3 San Juan County Commissioners released their emails related to a grandma request. And in those emails, they revealed that 2 of the 3 San Juan County Commissioners frequently met privately with their private counsel on multiple occasions to discuss commission agendas prior to commission meetings. The emails also revealed that the purpose of these meetings was to make sure that they were all on the same page regarding commission agenda items. The commissioners had OPMA training and were warned by the county attorney that they may be violating the statute. We had legal analysis conducted of these communications, and they determined that the communications were inconsistent with OPMA's intent to conduct their deliberations openly. However, because of ambiguities in OPMA, it cannot be concluded definitively that they violated any provisions of OPMA. Now, in the future, to avoid the risks of violating OPMA, we recommended that San Juan County Commission pass an ordinance that details the policies and procedures governing open meetings and goes beyond state statute to expressly forbid a quorum of commissioners to meet and discuss any commission business without first making a public notice of the meeting. Now, the second finding concerns the use of a private attorney by these 2 commissioners to conduct county business. We have 2 concerns. First, the lack of transparency, and second, the potential for undue influence in the following ways. These 2 commissioners accepted thousands of dollars in pro bono legal services from their private attorney. The commissioner's private counsel sought payment from local special interest groups for legal services given to these commissioners. And finally, one of the commissioners submitted a resolution to the county to hire the private attorney from whom they were receiving pro bono legal services. Now, due to these and other concerns, it's our opinion that the commissioners may have placed themselves in a position to be unduly influenced by their private counsel. Now, to reduce the likelihood of these events occurring again, we recommend that San Juan County Commission go beyond the requirements of statute to ensure sufficient transparency of county business. So we recommend that the San Juan County Commission pass an ordinance requiring commissioners to complete a yearly individual disclosure form that lists their potential conflicts of interest and acknowledges the completion of annual training. We also recommend that the San Juan County Commission pass an ordinance that requires the disclosure of potential conflicts of interest at each commission meeting And finally, that they pass an ordinance that delineates the ethical behavior expected of county employees by expanding the state statute and requiring the disclosure of any pro bono legal services in relation to commission and county business. This concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Let's go to the committee for questions. Okay. Representative Kohler. Actually, it's Representative Garner. Sorry, Representative Garner. No?
It's actually me, Mr. Chair.
I don't know if you've seen this, but it has the mic and then it has a name here and a name here, and I have a 50-50 chance of getting it right, because the light does not match up with your name. So is that Kohler?
Gwen.
Or Gwynn? Go ahead, Representative Gwynn.
Thank you. Can we go back to just the last slide before this one? So we're already required to disclose conflicts of interest. Typically, when a particular agenda item has a conflict of interest, right? They have to disclose that before they vote, or if they. Are you saying that they should address potential conflicts of interest at each meeting, regardless of whether anything on the agenda may or may not be a conflict?
We're recommending that they, if there is conflicts, if they have potential conflicts, that they announce it in the meeting itself. And we found that there's another county that does this.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Representative Cutler.
Yeah, my question was similar. I wondered if you could comment on the difference between any county disclosure rules versus state and local disclosure rules. Typically, public officials are always required to submit a disclosure at the beginning of a term.
Yeah.
And here you're suggesting, or maybe the first question is there a difference between the county disclosure requirements or expectations and what's currently required?
Well,
State and local.
we noticed that they were just going by state law. And to make recommendations to address these concerns, we went further and recommended that they have county ordinances to further bolster or control these issues.
Thank you. And we had another situation with a disclosure problem up in Cache County, and I've wondered, is it a problem with the law, or a problem with, or an issue of it's not easy to comply, or we're not following the existing rules and making it very transparent, and if we had a more transparent system for disclosures, it would be easier to track that. But
So a three-member county commission, they function as both legislative and executive, is that right? So that's a little bit different animal than the legislature when we're doing legislative work.
Yeah.
And when you have three and when two of them are getting together and discussing business, that's a quorum. And so, okay, let's go Representative Kyle.
Yeah, Representative Cutler asked my question, so.
Okay. I don't see any further discussion or further I have a question. Who are the special interest groups that are being solicited to cover the legal fees?
Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and it was the Rural Utah Project. Those two.
They're asked to cover the private attorney fees.
To cover the fees. We don't know if they collected any fees from them.
All right. Okay. Senator Stevenson.
You got that right. Thank you. We run into this. It's been an issue for a long, long while in the state. I know when I was on a city council, you put 3 city councilmen together, and it's technically an illegal meeting. We've created the inland port recently. We only have 5 board members, and the only way you really keep it straight is we have legal counsel that is very, very adamant that the 3 of us aren't together at the same time. So we find that there's a lot of the things going on with the port that maybe Senator or Representative Schultz and myself will be together. We'll have our legal counsel, and then we can certainly put our executive director in with us. But the only way we solve this under current regulation, I think, is we just have to be very conscious of it, and we have to treat the law that it is the law, and that we're going to have problems like we're having right now if we don't pay attention to what's going on. And I think I know, I mean, I can go back 30 years and I can explain situations where we have to be really careful. Someone needs to walk away from the council meeting after the council meeting, if you will, and make sure that you're not creating a perception. If not, we need different legislation. I don't know what that would be. I know of the Inland Port, it works well because we have legal counsel that's very conscious and an executive director, that there just aren't three of us together at the same time. So if there is legislation, we need to figure out what it is and then figure out probably a penalty for it, because it's sometimes hard to do. It's hard not to, especially where a lot of times we become very social with one another, and it's hard to realize you've stepped from your meeting into a meeting that is technically illegal.
Thank you, Senator. See no further questions. Gentlemen, thank you. Now we'll hear a response from Bruce Adams.
Good morning. My name's Bruce Adams. I have lived, my ancestors have lived in San Juan County for 5 generations. I am in my 19th year as a San Juan County Commissioner. About a year and a half to go and you'll be rid of me. We appreciate the audit. This is Sylvia Stubbs, a new commissioner, was sworn in January of this year. And we're here to give you our reaction to the legislative audit and possibly make some suggestions that we think might be helpful. If you have a copy of the audit, I'd like you to turn to page 4, where it says private counsel's emails to commissioners. Oh, by the way, our county attorney had grandma'd both commissioners' emails and texts for a long period of time, and it wasn't until the fall of last year that Commissioner B gave us his laptop and we discovered what was in the emails. There was a little over 1,000 emails that were on his computer that were analyzed that had to do with this particular problem. But if you look on page 4, private counsel's emails to commissioners, March 18th, and they were sworn in 2019, it says, at the meeting last Friday, we agreed that it will foster better communications if we have weekly conference calls to discuss strategies and issues that will come up in commission meetings. Commissioner A, legal assistant, name withheld, and I agree that we will hold those meetings at 3 p.m. on Monday every week. On the day before the commission meeting, we will discuss items on the commission agenda and make sure we are all on the same page regarding those items. I sent out a calendar invitation for these conference calls. Now, if you look at page 5, the email that is titled Private Counsel's Email to Commissioners, August 8th or 28th, 2020, Commissioner name withheld and Commissioner name withheld. Can you be on a short call Monday at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock? We can review the San Juan County Commission agenda and discuss any of the items that might be controversial or need special attention. May 17th, 2021, please join a Zoom call at 1 p.m. today, Monday, May 17th, to discuss redistricting resolutions to hire name withheld as San Juan County consultant. December 8th, 2021, it is vitally important for Commissioner A and Commissioner B to be in complete and final agreement regarding which plan they will vote for before the meeting on the 21st. Private counsel to commission, name withheld, December 15, 2021. During our Monday discussion on redistricting, both you and the commissioner, name withheld, indicated that you, number one, name withheld, option B for county commission districts. Next, Navajo Nation Human Rights Council plan for county school districts, county school board districts. The motion that you should make is, quote, I move to approve, name withheld, option B for the county commission districts and to approve the Navajo Nation Human Rights Council Commission plan for the school board districts. As private attorney noted, it's super important that you stay united on this issue. Now turn to page 7, the email for private counsel on local special interest, February 18th. This is a month after they have been sworn in. We've discussed having local special interest group pay for private counsel's invaluable advice and counsel to the new commissioners to help them navigate at all levels the current San Juan County government structure. Past kitchen cabinet work, November 6, 2018, February 7, 2019, firm name withheld, fees and costs at $350 an hour for private attorney, $225 an hour for name withheld associates, equals $27,265. Now if you'll turn to the fourth item on page 8, the very top paragraph. The commissioners receive thousands of dollars of pro bono legal services, the possible payment of these services by special interest groups, and the attempt by one of the commissioners to find county employees for their private counsel are troubling findings. Due to these and other concerns, it is our opinion the commissioners may have placed themselves in a position to be unduly influenced by the private counsel. Have the commissioners used the county attorney's services instead, there would have been more transparency through grandma requests for public held documents and more accountability due to the fact that the county attorney is elected by a private election. And my last one is that the recommendations on page 9 all state that all of these problems need to be addressed by the county commission by passing ordinances that shore up the state law. We as a county commission feel like we're a subdivision of the state, and therefore we depend on you to help guide us and help direct us by passing laws that will be helpful to us as county commissioners. We feel like this has been done, and we're not firmly in agreement that we should pass these ordinances, although we're ready to do so. We've discussed it with our county attorney, but we're not sure that we need to pass ordinances that go far beyond state statute in order to conduct business as a county commission. I'd like to give a little time to Sylvia Stubbs, my fellow commissioner.
Sylvia, welcome. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Sylvia Stubbs. I'm County Commissioner for District 2 in San Juan County. I am an immigrant from Argentina and have lived in San Juan County for 40 plus years. First, I wanted to talk how it felt being a citizen under these conditions. And when I talk about San Juan County, sometimes people probably think we have an area, part of the Navajo Reservation plus Ute Reservation. When I talk about, I'm talking about the people in San Juan County, how we felt. It was so discouraging to see those meetings, and I couldn't understand what was going on because even when the council would tell that it wasn't appropriate, those commissioners kept going. So if you read those emails and you watch YouTube, the emails about their meeting. So this is meeting plus following directions. So if you watch what happened on Monday, the recommendation they're given in the emails, and what happened on Tuesday, those commissioners follow step by step, and even they were told, you don't have to listen. You have just keep going. Don't listen to what it tells you. And so this is just not only commissioners not following the rules, it's the outside influencing these commissioners. So in page 8, under the in the little yellow parts of the 2 commissioners in question were not reelected in 2022. But you know what? Those lawyers still around, and they have influence at San Juan County in so many ways. And so I think that, we can fix certain regulation, but what happened when we have that kind of outside influence that come? And I think another thing that we have a problem too is because, especially down the Napo Strip, the reservation strip, people register by post box numbers. And so sometimes we don't know where the people live, or if they're members of chapters and they can live anywhere and they still be member of the chapters. So I think there's some things that we need to look. And then as I saw the situation and I can see that the person that was in my district had an opposition, I jumped the race. I'm not a politician. I'm a retired educator. And I have worked with many of the Dene people from that south. And I know other struggles that comes from the power sometimes the leaders have. And when I said, well, you need to speak up, and they said, well, we have to live among them. And when you have outside influence coming telling them how to rule, and it's not helping anybody in San Juan County. One thing would be if they were ruling for their group, for their people, but they were not ruling for anybody. They were just making rules for those to further somebody's agenda. And another thing, besides having those meetings, I'm a second language speaker, and I can tell different language are structured a different way. And when you read the resolution, the writing of the resolution coming before the commissions, you know they were not written by a second language learner. These are very polished resolutions, and so you know that they were not only influenced on how to act in the meetings or what to pass and what to reject, they were influenced with the resolution that were drafted by their lawyers for them. And so I am here like I said, I jumped the race because I just saw the hopelessness of everybody. And it had been a hard campaign and very close results in the race. And when we say they are gone, they're not gone in a way. And so we need to somehow figure out ways that we have more clear rules, as far as residency, I don't know, but I just happy to be here. I'm grateful for the auditors, grateful that we are listened to, grateful for have the opportunity to come before you and for them putting together this booklet so people can see. But if I know we don't have time, but if somebody will go start reading the email from day one, it's not like they were discontent with a county lawyer, when in despair finding somebody. No, those lawyers were from day one. Soon the election was over. We're there. Thank you very much.
And
Thank you.
We as commissioners all receive the same training every year. Our county attorney gives us OPMA training, ethics training training on transparency as far as being a commissioner, and everybody received the same training, but I guess it just didn't happen the way it should. And I guess one recommendation we would like to make is there's some culpability on the part of those attorneys. We feel like they were misguiding the two commissioners and putting them in a bad position, and the two commissioners had too much trust in what they were being told. One attorney lived in Durango, Colorado. The other one lived in Moab. And if we were to make a recommendation, we would hope that something would happen to the two commissioners who we feel were doing things wrongly, and that they should have to be held accountable.
The two lawyers.
Yeah.
The two lawyers, Mr. Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Okay, let's go to the committee. Senator Stevenson.
Thank you. You know, again, I've lived this for nearly 50 years, and I don't know the law has changed a lot, but it just seems like that this is really a simple thing. There's 5 people, 3 of them can't be together and discuss business, and their legal counsel should lead them through this and make sure that they're trained and make sure they're not doing these kind of things, not helping them. If I'm understanding this right, it seems like the legal folks maybe some liability there. I don't know. Again, we've been doing this for a long time in the state of Utah. I don't remember the league offers training. I'm sure the counties offer training to make sure that this doesn't happen. It seems like it's simple. I don't know whether we need any changes in our law or not. It seems like it's pretty plain, and it's simple. It's not complicated. It's, you know, if you can count to 5, you ought to be able to figure this out pretty easy. So, and I would hope an attorney could figure out. I hope attorneys count to 5 too. Most of the ones I've had are pretty capable of doing that. So, I don't know that we need to jump into this much more than we have, other than just take serious that, you know, and these auditors, I love auditors because they're willing to always come back if we need them. So that's always worked well for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So we have 3 county commissioners, and you are 2 of the 3, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, you have a quorum right now, so be careful. Okay, Representative Garner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Question to Commissioner Abs on you expressed some hesitance of the commission to pass the ordinances that the auditors recommended, that you are okay with it, but you're holding off on it. Could you expand why you're holding off on it per se right now?
Well, we're hopeful that the legislature will make some recommendations. We think that this report has far-reaching implications, that other counties may run into the same problem and then say, well, look at the legislative audit that was done in San Juan County. You know, so we're not in violation because the legislative audit really didn't make any recommendations other than every county. Well, maybe not every county, but the county passed some ordinances. Again, we're a subdivision of the state. You pass a state law, we try to implement it at our level, and we're just not sure what's accomplished by passing an ordinance. And even part of the recommendation is that at every commission meeting that declarations are made and OPMA is revisited, and you know that Ethics Act is revisited at every meeting. You can only imagine what would happen if that was done at the legislative level. So I guess we'll do whatever the legislature recommends we do. If they recommend that we fully implement what's recommended in the audit, we're prepared to do that.
So if I may ask, would you ask us to pass this kind of language to be applied to statewide? These recommendations to apply to other counties that deal with these, that may potentially deal with these same issues?
I think if you don't, then they're not held to the same standard that the legislative audit is asking San Juan County to be held to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Garner. Representative Cutler.
I think that was left over from the.
Oh, Representative Quinn.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay. First of all, I think I heard from the testimony today that the two commissioners who were the subject of this audit are not in office currently. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes.
And then I think if I heard correctly, that your concern is that you want the law to be applied equally across all counties as opposed to singling out San Juan County for something that some commissioners that are no longer in office did. Is that correct?
Yes, and I might say that if there is really nothing done to curtail what has happened, that we may see those same two commissioners back in San Juan County in a couple of years,
or even somewhere else in some other county.
Exactly.
One question, and I haven't read the whole audit, and so I'm not sure if this was addressed, but we had a different circumstance just very recently where there was what somebody in the community saw as a potential violation of a Utah Open and Public Meetings Act. And they reported it to the Attorney General's office. The meeting was held in May. There was a letter from the Attorney General in June. So we're in the month we're in. There was that fast of a response to try and say, what were the circumstances? Is there a violation? What action needs to be taken? Was there ever any report to the Attorney General's office or any other action taken to try and say, hey, there's a need to enforce the Open and Public Meetings Act law in this particular case?
Yes. As soon as those emails were released, I got a thumb drive with over 1,000 emails on it, met with the Attorney General's office. There was actually 9 attorneys in the room when I presented this to him. My interim county attorney was also on Zoom. We probably met for at least 2, maybe 3 hours discussing the whole issue. The man in charge assigned one of the attorneys to review all of the emails and make a recommendation to the office. They promised that they would get back with me. It's been about 7 or 8 months, and I haven't heard anything. I think the Attorney General's office was waiting for the audit to happen, and I'm just guessing that because the other 2 commissioners were not reelected, that maybe they didn't see a need to address it. I'm speaking out of turn when I'm trying to speak for the Attorney General's office. All I'm telling you is I haven't heard anything from them.
And I think that's an important. It's important to point out that you have reported that. You've made every effort to say, hey, we have an issue, we have a problem here, and you don't have any report or any feedback from the Attorney General about whether they're saying this was a violation of law, it wasn't a violation of law. They haven't weighed in at all on that matter, to your knowledge.
They haven't answered back in any form to indicate whether there was or not a violation.
And I don't have any context or any information. I don't understand either, but I just would point out to the committee that I'm aware of one that happened very recently, and literally in a matter of weeks, there was a letter that went out, and it sounds like in this case, there's been no communication from them about the information that was reported to the Attorney General's office.
You're correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. I'm going to go to Mr. Reese. Our legislative auditors asked our council for this area to opine on this. Mr. Reese.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The auditors asked our office to give to weigh in on the possible or potential violations of the Open and Public Meetings Law, and I was asked to provide that analysis for our office. So my written analysis is actually attached to the audit report. And bottom line is, Open and Public Meetings Law is not as clear under these circumstances, or as applied to these circumstances, as you would hope they would be. There are a number of provisions that are kind of at odds with each other. They're not clear. So my bottom line conclusion was I was not able to conclude definitively that there was a violation of Open Public Meetings Law, although there seemed to have been a violation of the spirit of Open Public Meetings Law. But there's all sorts of permutations and different angles. I mean, there's a definition of convening a meet, and there's a definition of meeting, and then there's some language in there about 2 members of a 3-member public body gathering together, not constituting a meeting under certain circumstances. So there's a fair amount of ambiguity in the statute that led me not to be able to conclude that there was a violation of the provisions of Open and Public Meetings Law under the circumstances that the auditors were dealing with.
Thank you, Mr. Reese. I appreciate that. Representative Cutler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of comments here. First, as a former municipal official like Senator Stevenson's, we were well trained on these, and yourself were well trained on the requirements, but there is some ambiguity in the current statute, and it was sometimes unclear if we met, coincidentally, or we were at another meeting, what was a violation and what wasn't a violation. So I think it's worth looking into that a little bit more. Second, and in the case where there's a violation, what happens? It wasn't clear if you violate it, what the penalty is or what the remedy is. Second point, after listening to this report and the earlier report from Northern Utah with some challenges with disclosure, I just wanted to let the committee know that as part of a follow-up to an RFA from last year, I've been working with the Director of Elections, Ryan Cowley, on looking at disclosure requirements and would be interested maybe in a follow-up in studying that in more detail and bringing that to the committee for discussion. But currently we have one standard for disclosure, but we leave it up to municipalities and cities on how to, and counties on how to basically implement that. And they don't necessarily have to put it directly. They can send for example, a PDF file of disclosure to the state system, which is good, but it's not necessarily as transparent as it could be, because then it's not searchable. You don't see who is trying to influence across multiple areas. And there may be some advantage into having counties or other subdivisions of the state use the same disclosure system, so it's very transparent when there are disclosure issues, and make that more searchable and more clear to the public. So I just wanted to state that, and if anyone is interested in working on that with me, I'd love some help.
Thank you, Representative Cutler. I want to move on. We've got other items on the agenda, and I still want to hear from the public on this. But Senator Stevenson.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. I need to plead insanity. I was stuck on 5, not 2, and but that should make it. It should be easier to count to 2 than it is to 3. I was apparently thinking of my experience and not the 3 county commissioners, so my apologies. And insanity may be a great plea, so thanks.
I'm close.
Thank
Can
you.
I just state one other thing?
In just a moment. So, to me, the county commission has a different challenge than we do as legislators, and we do have conflict of interest. We have to file a conflict of interest and responsible for keeping it up to date. And if something comes before us, for example, on the House floor, and it's going to impact us individually more than the rest of our colleagues, the rest of the state, then we're supposed to declare a conflict. You have a challenge, and it only takes 2. Us, it takes 38. But you're also the executive as well as the legislative. And I believe your point is that if a fix needs to be done, it perhaps should be done statewide, so it applies to all similar situated forms of government. And just, we are the lead committee on this audit. And so we need to decide if we're going to do anything with it. So I want you to think about that. If you're in, I'll check with Chair McKell and see what we want to do. But this is our baby, and we need to decide if we want to clean up some of the ambiguity. Commissioner, go ahead.
Just kind of a related item. One of the 2 former county commissioners spent all 4 years living in Tuba City, Arizona, which is about 4 hours away from the county seat. It was a ruling by a federal judge that because he intended to live in San Juan County, he was eligible to be a county commissioner, but he never did live in San Juan County.
You have to have a sense of humor to go along with that, I believe. So thank you, Commissioner. Okay, let me go to the public on this audit. Any comments from the public on this audit? We have one. Okay, we'll take one public comment.
Thanks, Chairman. My name is Kelly Pearson. I was the county manager for San Juan County from 2012 to 2019. I appreciate this audit. It is pretty personal for me. I'm from Monticello. San Juan County was my dream job. I was the manager there. When the election happened that brought Commissioner A and Commissioner B in, I saw a drastic change where I saw emails that were professionally written, and I never heard from them until the day of a commission meeting, and they would bring 7 to 10 resolutions that were professionally written that I never reviewed, and we would have to pass them. They had already made the decision before commission meetings, and they would pass those resolutions every commission meeting. If these things are not breaking the open meeting law, I don't know what would. I mean, we had another incident in San Juan County where we have a lot of development happening in Spanish Valley, up near Moab, and our commission is districted, so they would go all the way to Spanish Valley out of their district and meet with residents, and they put a moratorium in building in that area before the commission meeting even took action. So if there needs to be something written to change the open meeting law, I would please advise it, because I don't know what else can be done. Also, I really don't think this audit went far enough. The answer that was given, if you found out if money was given to the attorney and to the SUA group, the answer was, we don't know. Well, who should find that out? And that's my suggestion. We should follow the money. We should see what happened. But there's a lot more that this audit could have done. Is this something that the Attorney General should look into? Is this something the county attorney should have looked into? I don't know. And anytime we brought it up when I was county manager, we couldn't get help. So when Speaker Wilson asked for this audit, I literally cried, because it was finally the opportunity for you guys to hear what was going on in San Juan County. And it divided our county drastically. And it affected my family. I took a different job. We moved out of San Juan County. And I hope something will happen from this audit. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of you for making the effort to come to Salt Lake. Representative Lyman, come up. Okay, this will be our last comment. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Al Capone was busted for tax evasion, but there was a lot more going on than tax evasion. And the same thing is in San Juan County. This was essentially, for the sake of the committee, this was essentially a hostile takeover of a small county with really large special interest money behind it. Very coordinated efforts with Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and Rural Utah Project. There was nothing that was benign about what was happening down there. We went through, prior to this election, we went through a brutal redistricting thing with a federal judge. San Juan County has been just the target of the environmental groups. It's Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and they have, pledged to do damage where they could. And we're not the only ones. You go to all these small southern counties, and they're all dealing with similar situations. So that's why we have state laws, is to help, prevent this stuff. And when people blatantly disregard state law, and then the audit comes out and says, well, maybe it'd be good if the commissioners pass some resolutions, I think we're falling short of our responsibility in the legislature. I just hope that we look out for our subdivisions.
Thank you, Representative Lyman. Appreciate that comment. Okay, we'll close the public comment period, come back to the committee. We have some choices. We don't need to do anything. We can open a committee bill file just as a possible path forward, and then we'll see if we want to do any changes in it. Concern I have, it sounds like some of the personalities have changed, but it doesn't change what could reoccur. And so we have to decide if we want to address it. So if anybody wants to open a committee bill file, that's an option. Representative Kyle.
Yes, I'd motion that we open a committee bill file. I agree with some of the statements that I think this should be addressed at the state level. I think it's important that we have figure out all these permutations and all the problems that can happen, and this may happen in another county as well. And I don't think it should be ad hoc among the counties.
Okay, thank you. The motion is to open a committee bill file. That's just a starting point of discussion to that motion. Representative Cutler, do you speak to that?
Sure, I would. I would speak in support of that effort, and whether it's a bill file or if the chair thinks it's wise to have a small committee spend some more time on this.
So I would appreciate a little working group to work on this for those that are interested. Hold on a second. Okay, let's be more specific. This is to address potential adjustments to the Open Public Meeting Act. Is that your proposal?
That is correct.
Okay. I mean, we've heard quite a few different things on here, but I think that's the intent of this particular bill. If you're interested in working on this, just shoot me an email or staff email, and I appreciate your efforts and your willingness to work. Okay, Representative Benyon.
Yeah, I would just support that motion also due to Robert Reese's comments that there is ambiguity. It doesn't sound to me like there was ambiguity in what happened, and I would support a working group.
Thank you. All right, so our analyst reminds me that a working group has to be less than a quorum when you're working on this, but it will be. All right, thank you. Further discussion to the motion. Representative Kyle, summation.
I'll waive.
Summation is waived. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go back to item number 2. Representative Reese, Mr. Reese has a proposed little adjustment to the tax increment financing legislation.
Thank you for the promotion, Representative Dunigan. Nathan, are you going to put up on the screen? I've done some drafting on the fly here to try to address the issue that Danny Walls raised. Basically, I've just added a definition of to deal with this issue, and I'm not proud of the language, but it's a dormancy period, and it's defined as a period that ends the later of 5 years after the project area funds collection period ends, and 5 years after the effective date of this section. So it allows at least 5 years after the effective date of the bill for the funds to be reallocated. And in same language, an agency with project area funds remaining at the end of that period shall use those unexpended funds as provided in that subsection, which is basically dealing with housing.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reese. So that, I believe, addresses Mr. Wall's concern as far as the tolling would start from the date of the legislation. Any discussion on that? Representative Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm supportive of the change that was made. Thank you, Mr. Reese. I wondered if we also ought to try and find a way to address the item where it seems like we're collecting more money in property tax revenue than what was anticipated, which is why the fund balances are increasing.
So, yes, that's going to be more complicated because these agencies don't set the tax rate. So, but my interest, if you're in agreement, is to pass this as committee bill today. We can work on that and see, and we can bring it back if we find a fix. But we've done a lot of work on this, and I'd like to see it go forward.
I'm supportive of that, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Is there somebody that'd like to make the motion to adopt this as a committee bill?
I'll make the
Walter.
motion, Mr. Chair, that we adopt the committee bill tax increment financing as proposed by
As amended.
As amended by
or
Mr.
with
by
the
Mr.
adjustment,
Reese. Yeah.
I would suppose. Okay. Discussion to that motion? See none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. All right, now we're going to go on to Metro Townships. We'll consider issues regarding the long-term viability of Metro Townships. Representative Tusher. Thank you for your work in this area, Representative Tusher. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you to the committee and Mr. Chair for this opportunity. This is a study item. I live in Salt Lake County, so I'm aware of this issue, and it's been an issue for decades with various fixes along the way and progress that's been made to try to solve some of the problems that have been created. I know that Mr. Reese and Mr. Brady might have some background that they wanted to share before I get started, so if I could turn some time over to them, and then I can fill in the color.
They're both clamoring to take that on. Go ahead, Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Brady is going to give an overview of the history of townships from 2015 forward. My intent is to kind of just give a very general, broad historical context before that period, because that kind of informs what you're dealing with today. Municipal services are called municipal services because they are typically and historically have been provided by municipalities, by cities and towns. So garbage collection, fire protection, and maybe more significantly, land use, planning and zoning issues have historically been done by municipalities. And throughout the 50s and 60s, that kind of the development is, particularly in Salt Lake County, kind of started happening outside of municipalities. In 1971, the legislature actually affirmatively authorized counties to provide municipal type services to unincorporated areas. Some in the local government area would say that's the worst mistake the legislature ever made, because it now allowed counties to take on those functions when historically it had always been municipalities providing those services. Counties historically had been seen as kind of an administrative arm of the state, providing, health services, administering elections, that kind of thing. So that was a pretty significant change to have counties, and it was limited to first and second class counties, but we're really talking about Salt Lake County because that's where the development was happening outside of municipal boundaries. So Salt Lake County took on the role of providing municipal services to the unincorporated areas. Well, those areas obviously developed substantially, and as they developed, adjoining cities, the tax policy kind of drove this largely because commercial development generated more tax revenue for local government than residential areas did. Residential areas typically aren't self-sustaining in terms of tax revenues. There's property taxes, and in commercial areas there's also sales tax revenues. So local governments, municipalities would annex those tax-rich areas, kind of leaving residential areas adrift on their own. And so there's a lot of concern expressed over the years about leaving pockets of unincorporated areas without the ability to sustain themselves. And, and finally in 1996, the legislature passed a bill creating townships. And originally it was just a designation of an unincorporated area that kind of preserved that area from incorporation and annexation without the buy-in of that area. It established a planning commission for that unincorporated area, for that township area. And so there was some protection afforded to those areas. Now it was kind of, let's just stop this game and lock things in place for now and kind of figure it out as we go along. So that was the 1996 solution, is kind of a temporary solution. 1997, there was a bill that passed that kind of transformed those township areas into planning districts. They were still called townships, and it actually eliminated some of the townships that sprung up in the meantime. But anyway, that was kind of the history leading to this. It was to 2015 when townships were actually given a status that's kind of a quasi-municipal status. And I think that's kind of where we're going with the discussion now, but I think I'll let Nathan take over from there. And that's a gross oversimplification of the history, so forgive me if I've butchered some of the details, but that's kind of just, I thought would be helpful to have that historical background as you deal with this issue.
I think that's a very helpful overview. Thank you. Okay, Nathan.
Thank you. Nathan Brady with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. What I'm going to be talking to you about is actions, legislative actions and other things that have happened since 2015. In 2015, the legislature passed SB 199, local government revisions that created the Metro Township form of municipal government. And what I'm talking to you about is included in a letter from the Metro Townships to the chairs. We'll be posting that to the meeting materials so that you can review it, and we'll be discussing it a little bit later. But this is at the tail end of that letter. It's the very last page. So in 2015, SB 199 created the Metro Township form of municipal government and required voters in Salt Lake County's unincorporated townships to vote to incorporate as a city or town or as a metro. At the time, Metro Township's taxation authority was seriously limited because it was assumed Salt Lake County would provide administrative and legal services to the Metro Townships. And then they were formed basically as quasi-cities. Your Metro Townships are Copperton, Emigration Canyon, Kearns, Magna, White City, who voted to become Metro Townships, and then Milk Creek voted to become a city. Those were the unincorporated areas that were affected at that time. In 2016, SB 150 Metro Township amendments authorized the Metro Townships to perform city and town functions, codified the election of Metro Township councils, and revised the definition of municipality in the Utah Code to include Metro Townships. Then you have this period of 2016 to 17 where those that chose to be Metro Townships in November of 2016, their councils are elected. The Lieutenant Governor certified the Metro Townships as municipalities, and they began in January of 2017 to operate as municipalities. You had SB 138 in March of 2017, Metro Township amendments that became effective, clarifying the Metro Township's responsibility regarding budget and ordinance adoption, local option sales tax reporting and collection, and Class B and Class C road distributions, among other things. Jumping to 2018, you had SB 175, Metro Township amendments, which converted the chairs and vice chairs of the Metro Township councils into mayors and mayors pro tempore. It clarified the amounts and classifications of revenues the metros can share and with the Greater Salt Lake Municipal Services District, which I'll refer to as the Metro or Municipal Services District, or MSD, which provides land use, code enforcement, and other administrative municipal services to the Metro Townships and the town of Brighton, and then reduced Salt Lake County's representation on the MSD board to one trustee. Going forward in 2019, you had Senate Bill 124, Local Government Administration Amendments, which removed the Salt Lake County Mayor as the CEO of the MSD, removed the requirement in Utah Code that Salt Lake County's clerk, treasurer, surveyor, engineer, and auditor must fulfill those roles for the Metro Townships. And as of that point in time, the Metro Townships can now contract with Salt Lake County for these services or assign them to non-Salt Lake County officials, just like other municipalities. This bill, Senate Bill 124, amended the Utah Code to clarify the terms city and town within the code, including the Metro Townships, depending upon their population. And that takes us to 2021. Senate Bill 58, Metro Township Amendments, authorize the Metro Townships to impose municipal energy sales and use taxes and municipal telecommunications license taxes. And that brings us up to where we are today. That's legislative action on the Metro Townships, but again, beginning with the creation and authorization of Metro Townships to incorporate as Metro Townships or as cities back in 2015 and the adjustments that have been made since then.
That is great background. Thank you both. Representative Tusher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for that background, because I do think it's helpful. I think it's important to note as well that these Metro Townships are specific to counties of the first class. So Salt Lake County. So this is not a type of municipal government that can be imposed anywhere else across the state. It's a Salt Lake County issue, and that's really where I got involved in this. As we'll remember, last year dealing with House Bill 374 and the issues around the Unified Police Department and the role of the county sheriff. Mr. Chair, did you have a comment? Oh, okay. The role of the county sheriff and how that works with some of these Metro Townships that have that were working together in trying to perform policing services. And as I met with the mayors of these townships, one of the questions that really came up in our discussions was, what is the long-term viability of this type of government? And why do we treat these townships any different than another town or city across the state? And that's why we've added it as a study item for this committee. And as I've met recently with the townships and their council, they put together this letter, which I think is really well drafted and gives a lot of the same background that we went through today. It is already posted in our meeting agenda, so you guys can pull it up to take a look at it. But the bottom line is that there was a time where I think it was important to have a transition period from an unincorporated state where these areas were not necessarily ready to take on the responsibilities that a regular municipality would take on, to where we are today, where for almost all intents and purposes, the Metro Townships act as towns and cities. The only difference being that their mayors are not necessarily elected from the constituents of those townships, but they're elected from those that are of the 5 council members that are part of the township council. And then that they're not able to impose any sort of property tax because all of the services are provided through some sort of service district, whether it's the MSD or Silvisa, which provides the law enforcement services, et cetera. And so as we met with the townships, what they have suggested in this letter is that we phase out the Metro Township model and just convert these Metro Townships into cities or towns, depending on their size. And one note I'll just have on that, if you look at the actual size of these townships, though within Salt Lake County they seem pretty small, if you look at them compared to other towns and cities across the state, they're actually quite large. Kearns has a population of about 37,000 people. That would be the 25th largest city within the state, larger than Midvale, Tooele, Springville, Cedar City, American Fork, etc. Magna, about 30,000 people, 36th largest city in the state, would be the largest city in the state, bigger than Farmington, Payson, Brigham City. Even some of the smaller, White City, you would think, well, that's a really small area. They have about 6,000 people, but that would make them bigger than Moab, Kanab, Morgan, Beaver, etc. And so these Metro Townships are ready to take on that responsibility. I know that there's representatives from the townships today that would like to speak to that. Mr. Chair, if you're ready for it. And at the end of this, what I would hope the committee would entertain would be a motion to open a committee bill file to get some legislation ready to move in that direction, that then we could come back and present later on in the year the logistics of what that might look like. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Representative Tusher, let's go to the committee. I don't see any questions. Let's go to the public play. Representative Senator Stevenson.
Yeah, we lived next door to a township up in Davis County for a while, and my question is this just Salt Lake County, or are we looking at this statewide?
So the metro townships are specific only to counties of the first class, and that would
Okay.
be the scope of what we're looking at.
I would think that, maybe as we go through this, we look at maybe expanding that and looking at some of the other townships across the state, only because they do really create issues and they do draw on services that sometimes they don't pay for. I believe, but I think you're right on with this one. We need to get this fixed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I just asked Mr. Reese how many other townships there are that were created before this township model, the metro township model came, but we're not sure. Okay, let's go. Thank you, Senator Stevenson. Let's go to the public. How many would like to speak to this? Raise your hand. We have 1, 2, 3. Okay, just come forwards, and if you'll give us your name, please.
Representative, my name is Sean Clayton. I'm the mayor of Copperton, and we fully support Representative Tusher's opening of this bill file. I signed the letter. I think it's a great idea. We're ready. We want this. We've actually been wanting this for a few years out in Copperton. I know we're the smallest township by population, but we have some big ideas. So,
What's your population?
a little under 1,000.
Which I'll say, again, is bigger than Loa, Eureka, Garden City.
Okay. Thank you. Corey, when you sit down, pull that mic just a little bit closer to the witness, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Corey Holdaway, I represent Magna Township. And would just thank the bill sponsor for his sensitivity to this issue. And the one thing I would just bring up is making sure that as we move forward, that the viability of these townships is maintained with regard to some type of tax structure through Slovisa or whatever. But I think we've got an understanding of the needs for that, both within Kearns and also Magna and the other townships. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holdaway.
Paul Ashton. I'm the legal counsel for Magna in White City, and I have been involved with this issue since 1996. And so I was involved with the original bills trying to protect and preserve these historic communities in Salt Lake County. And it has been an evolutionary process. And we appreciate the representative for being able to assist us to take the final evolutionary step. And that is to finally recognize these as fully acknowledged cities and towns based on their population. For all intents and purposes, they've been acting that way for the last 8 years, 7 years. Many of these communities were dragged there, kicking and screaming. And for those who have been around, you can understand some of that. In White City, for example, Paulina Flint is the mayor. I was very involved with the special districts. In dealing with some of the code, I look back on those battles that we used to have, and I realize now I'm dealing with legislation that I helped put amendments into, and I have to deal with that. And so hindsight's always 20/20, but thank you for your help on moving these communities forward as they become full cities and towns.
Thank you. Thank you for your work, and for all three of you gentlemen, thank you for making the effort to come and sharing your comments. Representative Tusher, does that conclude your comments?
If I could just add one thing. One thing that I think is important to note is that, at least as far as I've talked to the townships, they do like the ability to participate in the MSD, to continue to create economies of scale and work together within these service districts. And so there's no intent right now that they would have to leave the service districts if they were incorporated as cities and towns. So I think we can still get the same benefit that they get today of aggregating their spend, but treat them not like second-class cities and towns, but like the cities and towns that they are.
Thank you. Okay, so that leads us to our potential action phase. If somebody wants to move to open a committee bill file on this issue. Representative Walter.
Mr. Chair, I move we open a committee bill file for the Metro Townships issue we've discussed today. It's an interim study item.
Thank you. The motion is he moves to open a committee bill file to address the Metro Township issues as presented today. Is there discussion to that? Representative Stevenson. Senator Stevenson.
That's okay. I consider that a promotion, so I'm good. I would think that maybe that ought to be Representative Tusher's file.
So that's a great point. And let me just say that anybody can open the committee file, and that's up to the committee chairs to assign it. I have no reason why we wouldn't assign it to Representative Tusher. So he'll be working. He's going to do the work. Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. We'll get that bill file open. Thank you, Representative Tusher, for your work.
Thank you.
And thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Okay, item number 5, Growth in Public Treasurers Investment Funds. This is Representative Walter. Representative Walter, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the presentation should be displaying now.
Yes.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to visit about the Public Treasurers Investment Fund today. This is an interim study item that was part of our approved study item list. And I do have a presentation. I'm going to walk through 2 specific items today. The first one is public PTIF, or Public Treasurers Investment Fund disclosure recommendations. And then I'd also like to introduce a potential intermediate maturity fund proposal which goes along with this. So I'll walk through this fairly quickly, but the presentation is posted as part of our disclosures for today's meeting. So first of all, the Public Treasurers Investment Fund disclosure recommendations. The PTIF is run and managed by the Public Treasurer's Office. You can see the snapshot from the website. It's available to state and local government entities as a short-term cash investment vehicle. If we look at the performance over the past, it's actually been very exceptional. The Treasurer's done an amazing job. Our current Treasurer, Treasurer Oakes, previously Treasurer Damshin, they've been very, very good fiduciaries of the funds that have been entrusted to them. The cost of managing this fund is extremely low. So a lot of times management fees eat up investment returns, but we're talking about 1/2 of 1 basis point. The cost is extraordinarily low. They've been phenomenally effective at this. They provided, in terms of a short-term investment vehicle, very attractive rates. They're doing an exceptional job. I think today we're close to 5% given the current interest rate environment. Item number 3 is a very interesting one. We're currently managing $29 billion in public money in the PTIF. In 2016, it was 10. So in the course of just a few years, the growth in political subdivisions funds that are being managed by the Treasurer have grown by $19 billion. That includes funds from cities, counties, water districts, school districts, universities, etc., all political subdivisions. The PTIF complies with the Money Management Act, and for many of our political subdivisions, it's a very safe and a very reliable way to take cash reserves and put them to good use, unlike maybe what we might have thought about a decade or 2 ago when, or it was notorious, the Orange County failures and issues that were related to management of public money. So the Public Treasurers Investment Fund has been performing very well in its intended purpose. Today the rates are, this is the most recent posting, but right around 5%. So if you think about that, we've got $29 billion paying 5% interest that's benefiting the political subdivisions. That's actually a nice thing. If you look historically, it wasn't that long ago in 2022 when before interest rates started rising, We were, you know, at the, you can see there in the beginning of 2022, 0.39%. So the current high interest rate environment, although has lots of negative consequences in many other contexts, it's been very good for the PTIF. So the first comment is that they've been very successful, and I think that it's a compliment to the treasurers. But I do think there's a question, why are political subdivisions holding $19 billion more funds than in 2016? And unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question. I don't think it's a question of the performance of the PTIF. In some ways, it's a compliment to the performance of the PTIF. But the question is just simply which political subdivisions and why are they holding so much additional resources? Every one of those political subdivisions discloses their PTIF holdings on their annual financial report. So theoretically, we could get together and we could go download thousands of annual financial reports, and we could compile a report that showed us which political subdivisions were holding how much. But I think a simpler solution would be just to request in the fall that we receive a report to the legislature, the balances held in the PTIF by political subdivision as of the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 30th. That way we'd be able to see how cash balances were changing at the political subdivisions that were essentially accumulating substantial reserves. And that might impact the decision of the legislature in terms of how we appropriate funds in the future. There's a question why, right? One of our responsibilities is to help hold those political subdivisions accountable for the state funds that are appropriated to them, and so that's the first part of the proposal is just simply to say we've got a lot of public money that's managed by the PTIF. Which political subdivisions are holding it, and how much is there? So that's the first part, and I think that would be that'd be my first recommendation as part of a committee bill file that we could open. I want to address one other item, and that is what would be considered an intermediate maturity fund recommendation. So right now, if you look at going back to the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund website, it's available to state and local government entities as a short-term cash investment vehicle. That's the stated purpose of the PTIF. What if the funds being held by the political subdivision are not short-term? Right? Maybe it's debt service reserve. It might be 30 years that money is going to be sitting in. It's going to be sitting in an investment. It could be some kind of a medium-term capital expense that we're looking 5 to 10 years out, or there's going to be a project that we're planning for, but we don't have any plans to do anything in the near term. And then a third thing, which may be totally legitimate for short term, is just we need more general reserve funds because the nature of operating cash requirements and et cetera. But the idea is to start thinking about, well, the PTIF is designed for short-term needs. What happens when we have long-term or medium-term investment or other needs in our funds? A good principle is that short-term cash needs should be invested in short-term investments. It was a violation of this principle that got Silicon Valley Bank in trouble this March, right? We're not proposing that we violate this really critical principle of investment. Short-term cash needs should be invested in short-term investments. But I think a fair question is, what should longer-term cash needs be invested in? And the answer could be short-term investments. There's nothing wrong with that. But there might also be a reason why we might want to approach if you want to think about it this way, like a CD-like product where we can achieve a little bit of a premium. Where to hold the money, at least in my view, should be up to the political subdivision. They should have some discretion. Most political subdivisions invest in the PTIF because they don't want to take risk, and they don't have the staff to manage risk, and that's a reasonable concern from them. Some political subdivisions with very large amounts of capital successfully hire staff, manage risk, and they generate additional return. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to give you a couple of brief examples in both categories. So I'm showing you the Washington County Water Conservancy District. They have $291 million in the PTIF. The only other financial reserves they have is $12 million. and that's just just operating cash reserves. So they don't have any investment strategy for any of their long-term capital needs, which the Washington County Water Conservancy District is primarily involved in long-term capital investments. They don't have any they're not doing anything except for just putting the money in the PTIF. And right now that's really great. But in visiting with them, I have asked them why, and the answer is, well, it's safe, and we don't have any exposure from the Conservancy District for that management. This next one is the Utah State University, their 2022 annual financial report. In total, they have right about $1 billion in all of their cash and investments. About 6% of it, $58 million, is in the PTIF. Their total cash and cash equivalents is $180 million. You can see there's $54 million in cash, $60 million in money market accounts. They also have other short-term investments outside the PTIF, which are similar to some of the same holdings in the PTIF. That's commercial paper and corporate notes. There's $85 million there. And then you see their long-term investments. And my only comment here is to demonstrate that at some point, if you have enough capital, you can effectively manage an investment strategy that is, in this case, it's appropriate and it generates excess return for the university, which is good for the university and it's good for the state, right? Because that ends up being resources that accrue to the benefit of the university and help fund operations that we don't have to appropriate to them. I'm going to show you one other one. So this is the University of Utah. University of Utah has you can see at the very bottom of the slide, $4.8 billion. They have 462 million, so about 10% in the PTIF. Their total debt securities, which is the largest portion of their portfolio, is $3.5 billion. And then they have other investments that bring that total to $4.8 billion. And one of the things I wanted to show you here very briefly is that at the University of Utah, they recognize that there is benefit in looking at different terms other than just short-term investments. So you can see they've got $2.2 billion in investment maturities that are less than 1 year. That's less than half of their portfolio. And then they have $784 million in 1 to 5 years and $493 million in 6 to 10 and $23 million in more than 10 year maturities on their fixed income investments. And then they also have, by investment rating, you can see there's a wide range of investment ratings including unrated. And the unrated category isn't necessarily a concern, right? You can see the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund is technically unrated. And so there's appropriate things you can do in that space that comply with the Money Management Act. But my only point is to illustrate that if you have a very large amount of resources, you can generate additional yield for this public entity that if you are smaller, you can't take advantage of. And so the recommendation is there is a little bit of additional yield over time. It's about 1%, right, between short-term and long-term. Today, that's not the case, but today is something that happens infrequently over time. So my question is just how do you make this option available to a school district or a water district or a small city that has maybe 20 million or 200 million instead of 1 or 5 billion? And I have taken some time to visit with the treasurer and the deputy treasurer. Their feeling was they didn't want to manage an additional fund, and I understand and respect why. And but the thought was that maybe we could have we could make available a longer duration, intermediate maturity fund strategy to political subdivisions with smaller fund balances where we can similarly keep the cost low, probably stay fixed income focused, keep a similar risk profile just with a longer term investment. And then instead of managing it by the treasurer, manage it by a qualified investment advisor who has to meet both Money Management Act requirements and state procurement policies, and they have to also keep the cost low, right? So that would be the idea, is to give them a opportunity to consider whether there was an appropriate intermediate maturity appropriate longer term investment option to match their longer term cash holdings. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's my presentation, and I'm open to questions.
Thank you, Representative Walter. Let's go to the committee for questions. Representative Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the individual on this committee most unqualified to ask any questions on this particular topic, I'm taking a bit of a risk here. So sorry in advance. But the question I have is, you make a note here that the treasurer's office doesn't want to be involved in this. They want to kind of delegate this authority to somebody else. Why? Isn't that sort of their job?
So I think that's a good question, and I can see both sides of this. In order to do this, we'd ask them to staff up and hire a investment management team, and they're already managing $29 billion, and I think that they're maybe concerned about how much they might have to manage. And so if you look at SITFO, which is the School and Institutional Trust Lands Administration, it's their financial portfolio. We've outsourced that, and I think that they're looking at that model as a model for how you might maybe different investments, but same framework for outsourcing it. I think that that's their preference. But coming back to your question, I think that we could make a different determination if that was the will of the legislature.
Thank you. If I may, a follow-up question. Of the two options, I really like where you're headed with this in terms of, this is the public's money, like how can we get the best ROI? Outsourcing or keeping it internal within the treasurer's office, which is going to have the best opportunity for oversight on the public's money as you move forward with this sort of strategy?
I think that that's a great question. If our state is managing the money, then we have 100% oversight, right? If we have a third-party investment manager, then if they chose to, violate some provision of state code, then we have to seek enforcement, and it's probably more challenging than if this treasurer were to manage the funds in-house.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Snyder. Representative Garner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also feel totally unqualified to ask some of these questions, but on your first recommendation about some sort of report to the legislature, I really think that's great. Yeah, I'd like to see in that report, first for that be public as well, so public can see where the money's going as well, but also take some of the comparison metrics that we could see. I think of a college student seeing at the U of U's report, seeing how much is in their investment profile and how much I'm paying in tuition. I want to see, what could we do to help with that, and what's coming from the federal government, what's coming from their own tax revenues, so that we can see kind of a balance of why are we investing versus investing in the market versus investing in projects that we're charging taxes for or charging fees or tuition or whatever for.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Garner. I think that's a great comment.
Thank you. So let's see, we have Senator Stevenson.
Thank you. I appreciate the chair. It seems like I've had more than my adult time here today. I understand why our cities and towns use this fund the way they do, and some of them do use it for a savings account. I think we allow them to hang on to a portion of their money on an annual basis, and I know as I served as mayor many years ago, we would use this we would save our money, and then we would pay for our projects, eliminating the interest we would pay on bonds. And that was a policy call we made clear back in the early 1990s, is do we want to pay interest or do we want to pay cash? And we found out that paying cash was the very best way for us to do business. The city still practices that, and they use this fund in order to compile the money they need for a project. Now they're probably one of these communities you talk about that are in for the 5-year haul maybe, because that is what it would take to accumulate the money for a project like this, or a project. It's worked very well, and I think I think a lot of us view debt as maybe not someplace we want to be, and that's why Utah is such a very great state, or very great places. We don't have a lot of accumulated debt. We have some. We need to make sure we do have a credit line if we absolutely need it. But this has been a great fund for not only our municipalities, but I think anyone that can use it. I know a lot of our agencies that use it or have the ability to, and seems like I'm not sure what the changes would be. I'd like to look at them though, but I think we're doing well with what we're doing. The other piece of this is, maybe long term or longer term investment would be different, but the other side of that is it's probably going to cost us considerably to do that. I mean, I would be the first to tell you our treasurer's office does an amazing job with what we're doing here, and just believe we're on a great track here. I don't know what the limit we want to take this to, and you're right, it's grown really quickly, but a great spot to have our money and a great piece of what the good that goes on in the state of Utah right now. So let's be careful what changes we make. I don't know how fast this can grow without causing a lot of people to start looking at risk. And there is risk with a fund getting too large, but right now it seems to be we're in a pretty comfortable mode with what's going on in the state.
Thank you, Senator Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Stevenson pretty well covered what I was going to talk about. I'll be brief. I know our time is valuable. My question was, obviously the Treasurer's Office, a half of 1 basis point is obviously very low. That's an amazing fee for a return of around 5%. Now, did you say that you thought long-term investments could have an additional 1% return? Is that what your estimate was, or was that something? And then obviously we'd have to renegotiate another fee if somebody else was going to manage a long-term fund. A lot of us in here will pay 1% to 2% for a money management fee for someone. So I was just curious if you've done any more investigating on roughly what you think the return would be on a long-term investment compared to short-term, knowing that the Treasurer's Office did an amazing job. Also, what those fees would be to manage a long-term investment, and would they want to do it for? I don't know too many people would want to do it for half of 1 basis point.
So to that point, I think those are really great questions. First one is that I've displayed a chart, and the answer is if you look at the 10-year Treasury versus the federal funds rate, that's the gap that I'm looking at, and what you're seeing is right now, obviously it's inverted, but that's a short-term phenomenon. You can see that short-term phenomenon just before 2010 and just before 2000, but typically there is a spread, and that spread has for the same, like for example, if you're buying U.S. government debt, it's the same credit risk. It's just a different maturity, and there's a premium or there's additional investment return that's available for on average the 10-year Treasury versus the federal funds rate. So yes, that's where I came up with the additional premium, or that roughly 1% is looking at these historical spreads. I think the second thing is I would agree very much that the Treasurer's done this extraordinarily cost efficiently, and one of the reasons why our political subdivisions with smaller balances don't pursue any other investment option is because it is too expensive for them. But if they were able to participate in a much larger fund, then their cost of administration goes way, way, way down. And so, for example, if one of the reasons why the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund is very, very, very low is because we have a large amount of money there that's being managed. And if it were $500 million, the cost to manage that fund as a percentage would be much higher. And so the goal here is to allow smaller municipalities. Senator Stevenson, you mentioned your experience with your city. If they chose at their discretion, if we can, to give them the option to make a decision whether or not they want it to be in short-term, like a money market investment vehicle, which is what the Public Treasurer's Investment Fund is, or like a CD-like product, which would give you a little bit more return, but it has more restrictions on when you can access the money.
If I can, Mr. Chair. So what you may be doing is you may be taking money out of the short term would that adjust the costs that the treasurer's office charges? I mean, would they have to charge more if those short-term funds were reduced?
We'd have to speak to them, but my guess is that there would be some costs that wouldn't go away and some costs that would probably adjust with the change in the amount of assets under management.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That's all the questions, Representative Walter. Thank you. For me, I think it'd be helpful for me and perhaps another future meeting, if you like, to hear from our state treasurer on this and perhaps our fiscal analyst as well, just to get their sense of it. Is there any concluding remarks you'd like to make?
Yeah, I think the concluding remarks are that for me, the one thing that I do think would be very valuable to the legislature is the first part. I think the second part is a longer discussion, this intermediate maturity fund. But the first part, we're not actually asking anybody to do anything different than they already are. They already publicly disclose their PTIF holdings in their annual financial reports. It's just that if we as a legislature want to see those holdings, we have to go to the auditor's office, you have to find the year, you have to download the annual financial report, and then you have to do it 1,000 times for each political subdivision. It would be very nice if we could have a disclosure that would allow us to see those already public holdings of public money instead of in the annual financial report in some kind of a summarized format.
I think that would be helpful too. And that would show you who's holding what. It doesn't tell you why it's in there, which is also important, but at least it would tell us who. So thank you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Let's go to our final item number 6, general aviation long aviation facilities. Representative Hall, welcome.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee, for listening to this. So this study came about because I and some other representatives have had some complaints from constituents as to new policies enacted by the Ogden City at Ogden City Airport. So back in the fall, sorry, not in the fall, in the session, I introduced legislation on this issue, but not sure I realized the albatross that it was when I first put it in and what a big issue it was. And it felt a bit rushed to me and too broad, so I decided to table it and push this issue to a interim study. And so I want to make it clear to those that have come to speak today, and I know there's some that have come to speak about the proposed bill that was from last session. I'm not proposing any legislation today. I'm just presenting an issue that is going on that I would like the legislature's input and help with. So as I looked into the issue going on at Ogden Airport, it seems to be unique to Ogden Airport. So I knew shortly after I released the bill and talked with some of the stakeholders that wasn't going to work. I've been trying to meet since then. I've been trying to make phone calls and meet with as many stakeholders as I can. And I still have more to meet with. I have some appointments in the coming weeks. But in all of my discussions thus far, I've been trying to see both sides of the story. And because it's so complex, that's why I've come here. Sorry, my mouth gets dry. So the complaints that came to me are that Ogden City has historically always renewed ground leases to the airport, from the airport to the hangar owners. but that the city has started a new policy of not renewing their ground leases to hangar owners, and that the hangars, after a certain determined period of time by the city, then revert to the city and will be owned by the city and can be rented back to the owner at a rental rate and not a ground lease rate. And I want to make it clear that I'm not arguing the legality of the lease contracts. That's not the issue at hand. I know the city attorney is here and he can speak to that. And I don't think that they would have moved forward if they didn't think they had a legal cost. That's not what I'm here to determine, is anything legality with the lease contracts. But what I'm arguing is that just because you can legally do something doesn't mean it should be done and that it's the best for the city. Even though the taking possession of the hangar owner's personal property could technically be legal, the Fifth Amendment implications don't settle well with the citizens and with my constituents that this new policy has affected. One of the biggest ramifications of this new policy is that the city hasn't fostered a good public-private partnership with the hangar owners and the users of the airport. Public trust has been lost, and businesses are leaving as a result of what has been done, and new businesses don't seem to be coming, yet the plan is still moving forward. I've talked with quite a few of the airport hangar owners, and not one would have knowingly entered into this contract agreement had they know what would be happening, even though in the language, I've looked at some of the contracts, there is some of it in there. A couple of them are here today, and some may be commenting online, but there are some that prefer to just write you a letter and let you know. So there will be some doing that. In talking with the airport manager, and I sympathize with his predicament. He came in and wants to make a new plan for the airport, and he feels like he's doing what he needs to do to try to further that plan, but it's coming at the expense of our citizens. And so I'm going to have my friend Jill, who has had some detailed information that when this first came to her, she can explain better on some of the things. So I'm going to let her do a little explanation, and then Representative Birkeland wants to tell what happened with her constituent as well. And then I've had Nathan Brady been doing some research for me, and he's going to give comment on there. So we'll go to that.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Jill, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jill Coford. I'm a business owner, an Ogden City resident, and an instrument-rated private pilot. I'm also a member of the Hill Flying Club, and our club owns 3 airplanes which are based at the Ogden Airport. They are not hangared. I serve on the Ogden Regional Airport Association Board, which is a private association of airport stakeholders. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I would love to own a hangar at the Ogden Airport, and actually had one under contract. But when I looked at the financials and the contract agreements, I couldn't make it make sense. It just made no financial sense to my husband and I to invest at the airport. So to be clear, I don't have any assets at stake in the issues that are facing the Ogden Airport. But I do have some concerns about the practices that are happening there, and I'm hoping we can find a way forward. Just by way of background, in November of 2020, I was asked by the airport manager to apply for the city's airport advisory board. Having applied before and sort of having a genetic defect where I want to serve my community, I was really looking forward to the opportunity to serve. The manager wanted to meet with me beforehand and before my appointment. So he and I spent just over 3 hours talking about his plans for the airport. I was told that my appointment was all but done and was invited to speak and participate at the next 2 advisory board meetings in 2021. But I left that initial meeting with some concerns, but I was also very hopeful that as a member of the advisory board, those concerns could be addressed and we could find some win-win solutions. So during our meeting, the airport manager told me his plans for the airport. The plan included the city taking over all fixed base operations at the airport. Those are known as FBOs. Ogden currently has 3 FBOs on the field who are privately owned and run businesses who provide fueling, hangar space, aircraft maintenance and rentals, and other free market services. So the city wanted to take over all of those operations according to this plan. The second prong on the plan was to tear down multiple hangars and for the city to take on the expense to build new hangars at the airport and a new terminal, and that eventually the city would own every hangar at the airport. I did a lot of listening to try to understand the reasons behind those plans. So fast forward to the next 2 advisory board meetings in which I was participating as an incoming member. Those meetings focused on the changes to the city ordinances known as Title 8, which governs the airport. The board was told that the FAA requires airports and their sponsors, or the municipalities, to enact reversionary language in all of their leases. It was stated in those meetings that this reversionary language was mandatory, and that to be in compliance with federal grant assurances, Ogden had to take ownership of every hangar at the airport. I asked a few questions because I wanted to know where this federal requirement could be found. I wanted the resource. I also expressed my concern about a municipality taking hangars that had been built by private businesses and individual citizens. I was struggling to understand how that aligned with both our state and federal constitutions. The FAA compliance manual is known as Order 5190.6, and that was cited as the reference, but it's a really large document, and the exact quote couldn't be found during the meeting. It's interesting to note that after asking these questions, my appointment to the Airport Advisory Board never happened. It seemed the city was moving forward, and it became apparent that any questions to their decisions were not really welcomed. So, wanting to really understand the issue and the reason for the city's actions, I dug in. I spent hundreds and hundreds of hours reading and studying both the compliance manual and any summary of the manual I could find. What I found is that the 5196.6 is a guideline for airports. That's a really important word. It's a guideline. It's not compulsory. There's a lot of deferring to the local municipalities and what makes sense for them. I think one of the most important takeaways from the compliance manual is that airports must be able to function as airports, and they should make their best attempt to be self-sustaining. Airports are an integral part of the transportation infrastructure, and as such, they are a public utility. The FAA wants airports to be, again, self-sustaining, and as a taxpayer, so do I. And as an Ogden City taxpayer, I really want Ogden to be thriving. Airports should be vibrant places that facilitate business and commerce. Due to the atmosphere at the Ogden Airport and the policies of the city, Ogden has unfortunately lost many lucrative opportunities and countless businesses on the field. We've lost them to other states and to other airports. These businesses are choosing to take their business elsewhere. A good friend of mine is a consultant in the aerospace industry and an FBO developer. He has told me many times over the last couple of years that until businesses can negotiate long-term leases with the city, which address the reversionary practices, they will not, they cannot, in good conscience, invest in Ogden City. As a lifelong Ogden resident and someone who earned her wings at the Ogden Airport, I really want to see this airport thrive. I truly believe that the stakeholders in the city, really at the end of the day, we want the same things. A place where people want to fly, where they want to do business, and where they want to invest. I believe there's a way forward, and I'm hopeful that with these important conversations, we can craft a path which will bring win-win solutions to the city and to the businesses and individuals who work and fly at all of our municipal airports. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments, Representative Birkeland.
Thank you, committee. I will be brief. I actually originally opened this bill file in 2022 because I have constituents that have hangars at the Ogden Airport. Likewise, we have multiple colleagues who have hangars at the Ogden Airport, and some of them are aware and some of them are not aware of what's going on. And to be brief, I want to share with you the issue that brought this to my attention to raise it to the level of opening a bill file. There's a woman, she's widowed, a former school teacher. She had 2 hangars. I'll cut to the chase. She was told she had to leave her hangar, that the city was going to take her hangar over, demolish it because it was not safe anymore. No longer could anyone dwell in that hangar because it didn't meet code. After lawsuits, all this, she keeps one. She just turns over the one that has to be demolished. She's tired. She's exhausted. She's had a tough life recently. She notices then, short time after, Ogden City not only did not tear down that hangar, they're now leasing out her hangar that she built and created that was supposedly not safe to somebody else. It's those kinds of practices that happen sometimes in government because we don't have guardrails in place to ensure that if we're going to take something from someone, their belongings, that they're given a fair market value for it, that they're given something for that property that the government is now seizing from them. I'm not trying to justify like she should have gotten X amount of dollars, but she should have received some sort of compensation for a hangar that she was told was not safe, could not be used. Oh, but by the way, we can and we are. So those are my concerns that brought it to my level of opening the bill file and why I'm still interested in making sure that while we correct this here in one area, if we don't correct this in one area, we could see it happening in everybody's areas. And that's my concern today and why I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Representative Birkeland. Now we'll go to Mr. Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nathan Brady with the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel. In the interest of time, I'm going to try and keep this short and brief. I was asked to do some research into publicly owned airports throughout the state of Utah. Got some responses I've handed out. A handout to you I've also posted under the meeting materials for this committee. And just need to have some disclaimers here. I was asked to look into whether or not these airports have reversionary clauses, meaning at the end of an existing ground lease, do the improvements in the facilities that are built on that ground lease, do they revert to the airport? So you've got, for those airports that are listed, you've got Salt Lake International, Ogden, Heber, Spanish Fork, and St. George are those that we talked to, that we got responses from, and whether or not they have reversionary clauses. For Salt Lake, yes, they do. Ogden, now with the Title 8 changes in 2021, yes. Heber, no. Spanish Fork, no. And St. George, no. The second thing that I was asked to look into is the ground lease. And this is really complex, and I apologize to those airport managers, those people I've worked with and talked to. If I butcher this, I'm sorry. I'm going to keep this very, very high level. I'm talking about ground leases for new construction of hangar-type facilities. And I know there are a lot of different types of ground leases out there, but if you look on this document that I handed out and is posted online, for Salt Lake, for example, the term of the leases are negotiated. It's negotiable. The term is based off of the investment. So if someone's building a facility, a rather large facility that has a high investment cost, the term of the lease can be extended up to a certain period of time. Typically, that's 25 to 35 years with first right of refusal on 2 5-year renewals at market rates. For Ogden, and I'll get into this a little bit later because I was asked to look into Title 8 and the changes. It's currently up to 40 years depending upon the type of investment that is made. But in Title 8, and I'll go over this, I believe the language, if I'm not mistaken, says that they can negotiate the term of the lease dependent upon the amount of investment that's made in order to allow a reasonable time frame for the owner of the improvements or the facilities that are being built to recoup their costs in a reasonable time frame. But also there's a conflicting interest on the part of the airport to maintain self-sufficiency. With Heber Airport, generally it's a 20-year ground lease with 2 5-year options. Again, nothing over 50 years. Spanish Fork has a 20-year with 2 5-year renewal options, but they noted that they have received approval from the FAA to begin offering up to 50-year ground leases for new facilities beginning in 2025. And then for St. George, it's a 30-year with option to renew for another 30-year lease, and the lease rates are subject to review and adjustment every 5 years. One thing I didn't mention is on Heber. When I was talking with Heber, their lease rates are adjustable. It's tied to the CPI, so those are subject to review and adjustment. I believe that's annually, though I hope I'm not mistaken there. But that's the review of the airports that I talked to. Some, again, a couple have reversionary clauses. Ogden is new with that change to Title 28 or Title 8 in 2021. The rest of those smaller, I'll call them smaller, hopefully no offense is intended here. The smaller airports, the rest have, that we didn't find any with reversionary clauses. I was asked to talk about the grant assurances. The FAA, and I'll really, again, there's a lot that I could talk about here. I've posted the link to the information online. If you want to review it more, I'd be happy to answer questions and talk offline afterwards. But grant assurances are requirements that are imposed upon airport facilities that accept grant monies from the FAA. There's several types of grants that are issued. There are a whole slew of up to, I don't know how many exactly, but at least 30 terms and conditions grant assurances that are imposed upon facilities that accept grant monies from the FAA. I think the one that is big here and applies to this issue is they require airports that are, what's the term here? They call it federally obligated airports that receive grant money from the FAA, from the federal government, to be it's grant assurance number 23 in subsection 9, maintain a fee and rental structure that makes the airport as self-sustaining as possible. And there's a whole lot more. That's really way above 50,000 foot level. There's a whole lot that goes into that. But again, as was mentioned before, a lot of recommendations from the FAA on what that means. Now, in talking to airport representatives and FAA contacts, this isn't something that is actively policed by the FAA, but if problems arise, if they are made aware of complaints or issues or violations of the grant assurances, then they start, their regional offices are tasked with looking into that and making findings whether or not there are actual violations, and then working with the airport facility to come up with a corrective action plan. I'm going to skip through the rest that I had there. Again, I hope I'm not doing any injustice by not covering what needs to be covered, but in the interest of time, I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to hit real quick because I was asked to talk about the changes that Ogden City implemented to Title 8. This is in 2021. And it's a rather long document. There's a lot of changes. I'm not going to go over the definition changes or the technical changes. I'm just going to focus on one thing, which is the changes to the ground lease agreements that are specific to new construction of hangar facilities. There was a change that now allows, the current policy allows for ground leases with the term of years sufficient to amortize a tenant's capital investment in the construction up to a term of 40 years. Now, previously, that was either a 15-year term, a 20-year term, or a 25-year term, depending upon the type of investment you were making. Now it's a little more broad. It's up to 40 years, depending upon the type of investment being made, and it's a reasonable time sufficient to amortize the tenant's capital investments. There is now included, that wasn't included before, a reversionary interest for the city. And the language reads, reversion upon termination. Upon expiration or other termination of any ground lease agreement, the leased premises shall revert to the possession or control of the city. The improvements installed thereon will become property of the city or will be removed from the premises at the tenant's expense at the option of the city. I would note there in subsection 1 below that, the above subsection I shall not be deemed to revoke any clause found in a current ground lease agreement that specifically grants tenants an option to remove or leave a structure on the premises upon termination of the lease agreement. So moving forward, and this language is required by the Title 8 to be included in all ground lease agreements, but moving forward, it's supposed to be clear that they have incorporated a reversionary clause. This is new as of 2021, and they should be forthcoming about that. I think, Representative Hall, I've covered what I need to cover. If I've missed anything, I apologize, but
No,
I'm
I
happy
think
to answer any questions.
I think you got it, and I think Nathan
Okay.
feels my pain. Am I okay to?
Is that your present? Do you have more?
Yeah, just a couple of other things. And like I said, I think Nathan feels my pain of trying to navigate this complex issue. One quick question for Nathan. I know you had told me in talking to some of the airports, did they give any reason why they don't enact reversion?
So the only one that I spoke to at length on this issue was Spanish Fork, and they indicated, and I won't get into all the details, we don't have time, and I'm not an expert on it, but I think my takeaway from in talking to these airport managers and facilities is flexibility is key. There are lots of different needs, and in the case of Spanish Fork, they specifically told me that if they were to impose a reversionary clause, they believe that would significantly stunt their growth. And so they've got pretty strict requirements on all their ground leases that they impose, but they do not impose a reversionary clause.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the big I'm going to go over this, that handout with you. These are just a few of the items that I thought of. There are still many more questions, but I have filed an audit request, and hoping that will get it's been approved, but it needs to get prioritized. Salt Lake International, I want to make it clear, is a completely different beast. I think any legislation that, if we think of any legislation after we study this for a few months, I'm not sure that they should ever even be included. They're a completely different beast in this. As Nathan mentioned, the FAA grant assurances are extensive and vague, but I'm not sure that they were intended to be used the way Ogden City is using them. And does the government have the right to take personal property without compensation and then profit from that personal property? And then another consideration is when they own the hangars, and I think this is another reason why some don't enact it. They are on the hook for all the repair. They would be responsible for the upkeep. And another thought I had too was that they cannot then collect property taxes. The county can't collect property taxes, but they still are on the hook for all the services going to the airport if there's fire or police or anything needed there. The big one to me is, how do we reconcile Fifth Amendment implication, which states, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And then finally, the biggest one to me, I love Ogden City. I love the area. I love the airport. I have many friends that own and fly. We need a good public-private partnership with the city and the airport. And as I study this over the next few months, and as I have more appointments with people, and as you hear from the people here, help me be thinking of something that could help, because I want this to be solved, whether legislatively or not. Like if they can do with a mediation of some sort, we need to come together so that there is public trust again with the airport. And with that, I can close.
Thank you, Representative Hall. So we've got about 10 minutes left. What we'll do now is invite a representative from Ogden Airport. Is there somebody here from representing Ogden that would like to come and speak? And Representative Hall, you can stay there. Jill and Representative Birkeland will excuse you, but sir, come up.
Hello, I'm Gary Williams. I'm the Ogden City Attorney. I'm well aware of all the issues that have been talked about today. I can answer specific questions, but I'm just going to give you some general, because I know you're almost out of time. The first thing I would say is that there has not been a lease in the last 30 years at Ogden Airport that didn't have a reversionary clause. They always have had a reversionary clause. It's just that what we did with this particular ordinance is we tried to forecast for people what was going to happen, because everybody was kind of surprised. I mean, one thing that is true is that Ogden City has consistently granted our tenants greater rights than they were obligated to have under their leases. And so we gave new lease renewals, where we didn't have to for many years, and those were decisions by past airport managers. But we decided to forecast that we're following FAA policy. The FAA was given a copy of our ordinance before we adopted it. They were fine with it. They don't have any problem with it now. We feel like we're following FAA policy, and what we're trying to do is maintain it in a professional way. What we're doing is consistent with what Salt Lake does. It's not just the international airport, but there are 2 GA airports that are very much like Ogden's, and we are doing those things that the FAA advises us to do, counsels us to do, gives us guidance to do. And the reason why they do that is because they give millions of dollars to our airport and every other airport every year. And that subsidizes all those rental payments that they have. And then we've been operating at a loss as well, and we give millions of dollars over many years to subsidize these airport leases. And what the FAA guidance is you should allow those ground leases as long as it takes to amortize their construction costs. And after that time, those should be turned back to the airport and leased at fair market value. And there's plenty of policies that say that. There's plenty of guidance letters that say that. There's a Shreveport case where the FAA came in and said, you cannot continue to just give renewal after renewal after renewal. in Shreveport, Louisiana. We looked at all that before we took our action. The airport is not blighted. The airport is busy. The airport has not gone dark. It is busy, and there is no absence of business, and no hangars are empty, although we do have many hangar owners that aren't flying, and they're just using it for personal storage. I will say that these issues have been litigated, and two different cases have been dismissed. We expect there might be more, but in the meantime, we are trying to work out resolutions. We already have 20 settlements with 20 of our tenant holders. And my big question is, if the legislature is holding out over our head the possibility that you might in the future adopt a statute that says our contracts don't matter anymore, that our contracts are going to be rewritten, what happens with those 24 settlement agreements that include new leases under new terms? What happens with all the new ones? You know, we have several dozen hangar owners who actually sign an addendum on a separate piece of paper for the sole purpose of saying, I understand this lease may be terminated within 6 months. They signed that in the last 7 years. A lot of those people are suing us now saying, I had no idea that the airport would ever take my hangar. What happens with all those agreements? Do they get rewritten by a future legislative action? And then what happens when you've given us $10 million, the state's given us $10 million to redevelop the west side of the airport and bring in infrastructure? And now we're going to enter into 40-year leases with all the west side of the airport. How am I, as the city attorney, supposed to draft an agreement with the legislature saying we might change all those contracts in the future? That's a really big deal for us. We are much more conscientious of our tenants' needs than has been represented. As you know from years in the legislature, it's driven by stories, and there's always two sides of the story. I won't endeavor to give each one of those now, but I will answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Representative Snyder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we're brief on time. It's been represented here that a widow was forced to give up a hangar that you are now leasing. I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. So that eviction began before there was ever a change to Ogden City Code. It began after she went 6 years without renewing her lease. After several years of trying to get her to renew her lease, we never had a conversation that we were going to tear it down because it was unsafe. Although when we did take the hangar back, they did have some unsafe conditions that we had to fix. But all that was before the ordinance. All of it was an old lease that she hadn't renewed in 6 years. And even in the best case scenario, we'd only renew the lease for 5 years. And so we had already gone past whatever renewal she could have possibly obtained. And a year past that, and we said, okay, it's time to evict her.
Follow up, if I may. So, but she does have a lease now on a separate hangar. So clearly she was capable or not of paying for a lease. And renewing a lease.
Yeah, she's paid for the lease. That's right.
Okay, there's probably more to that. I would just say, maybe in closing, Mr. Chair, it is absolutely the prerogative of this legislature, and perhaps it's important to remind the airport that we can change the rules unilaterally. And I think that we need to have an open and fair discussion. So I don't think it's necessarily fair to say that we can't even review these policies and that it's going to impact all these contracts moving forward. It's certainly our prerogative, and I would like to remind the city that we exercise that prerogative as necessary all of the time. So anyway, I just would like to remind that.
Thank you. I see no further questions. Anything else you'd like to add, sir?
No, unless there's questions.
Is there anybody else? We got like 3 minutes. Anybody else from Ogden or the? Okay, Mr. Deal, come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Cameron Deal at the League of Cities and Towns. I want to thank Representative Hall for acknowledging at the beginning of this testimony that this isn't about a particular bill yet. It's about highlighting some questions, and I also want to piggyback on what Nathan Brady has done in the research thus far, because most of the conversation today may have revolved around the Ogden City Airport, but there are airports across the state that haven't been referenced here, ranging from Provo to Moab, Bountiful to Panguitch, Nephi to Logan, Monticello to Cedar City, Hanksville to Vernal, that are all municipally owned airports. So anytime the legislature exercises the prerogative that Representative Snyder referenced, and trust me, I'm familiar with the legislature exercising that prerogative, anytime the legislature does exercise that prerogative, the potential consequences are broader than just one particular entity or one particular airport. And so since the issue is put on the agenda, we've heard from other airports around the state asking what could this potentially mean for us. Again, acknowledging the representative said there's not a bill yet. I just wanted to make sure that you as a committee recognize that you likely have airports in your districts and municipally owned airports in the district that are watching this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Representative Hall, I think you have some people that come. We're out of time. We can have another hearing on this. So I think you've laid out the issue well, and I think you've given us some good background. And of course, you'll keep working on it. And
Yep.
if you'd like us to come back with the committee, and we'd like to hear from your folks and get their viewpoint, we'd be glad to do that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Any closing remarks?
I think it's. I want to just mention. Mr. Williams mentioned that that we have given the city $10 million to help develop the west side, I believe he said, and I think it behooves us to look at this and make sure that investment is a good public-private partnership, and that the stakeholders at the airport are listened to a little bit. So I appreciate that, and again, I would invite anyone to come to any meetings that I have. I'll invite you. If you want to come up and look at the airport, I'd be happy to have you. The more ears, the better, in my opinion, to come up with something that might help. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to thank you for bringing us to committee with an open mind, seeking a solution. So thank you for taking that approach.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, that concludes our business for today. And next month, we're not meeting, so we don't have interim in July. We'll convene again in August. Who would like to move to adjourn? Representative Kyle.
Motion that we adjourn.
The motion is to adjourn. All in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. We stand adjourned.